Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. We're halfway through the year, and I've been really enjoying watching everybody's mid year book tags. Just like everyone, I can't believe we're in July. So, I, since I don't do videos talking about what I've read in a month, I often don't remember probably as well as I would if I was talking about all my reading in a month's time. So it was really fun looking back on my reading in the last 6 months because it's been a little different this year. It's been slower, more intentional. I've started and stopped a lot of things, which some I end up talking about, and other ones I don't record anywhere, so I forget what they are. But like I've just run through a ton of stops and starts, whether it was new releases, backlisted. It really didn't matter. Nonfiction. So I was curious to see what I would find in that list from the last 6 months. And so I've written some things down. I want to talk about six favorites in no particular order, really. I'm just going to read them off the list. I have my iPad here to help me talk about some of these. I have one of the books, but I didn't get it from downstairs. But my first one is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. And this was a new release. I don't know if it's unusual for me to have new releases on the list, but I read this when it came out. So it was right at the beginning of the year, and I really liked the format of the book, which was chapters from Cyrus Shams, the main character. He's an orphaned son of Iranian immigrants. Cyrus never knew his mother, killed when her plane was shot down over the Persian Gulf in a senseless accident. He spent his life grappling with the meaningless nature of his mother's death, which then makes him more interested in having a meaningful death and develops his interest in martyrs in particular. They call this a psychological fiction and coming of age story, and I would agree with that. And I think then there are chapters from his uncle, and there are chapters from his mother from when she was younger, and then she's pregnant with Cyrus, and how so he's an art student, if I'm remembering this correctly, but struggling. He doesn't have a lot of money. uh, I really I really enjoyed the way that Kaveh Akbar weaved the perspectives together, and then the very exciting, interesting thing that happens in the story, which I of course will not spoil. But yeah, it was very unlike a lot of books that I've read, especially new releases, in just the way it was literary and from an Iranian immigrant who is in particular studying or thinking a lot about martyrs. Just bringing out the whole subject of martyrs and martyrdom was really fascinating. And I know this is not Kaveh Akbar's first book, so I intended to make sure that I read um, any other book that he's written. I don't know if there's more than one other one, but I know there's at least one other one. And I haven't done that yet. But the second I have listed here as a favorite is The Magic Mountain. I had read this all the way up until the first few months of 2024, and then I finally finished it after really concentrating my reading of it in the first few months of the year. I listened to a lot of this on an audiobook, which is really unusual for me. And I'll list the narrator in the notes because that's what really kept me going with this book on audio. Was the narrator was just amazing. I'm using the word amazing. I really mean that. And then I would follow along physically. I would catch myself up in the book, and then I would read some of the book. And then in 2024, I was about a third of the way until the end and had really gained some momentum. This is a very long book. What is it? 600, 800 pages. And Thomas Mann's whole way of writing this book is that Hans Castorp, the main character, goes to visit his cousin in the mountains who's doing a rest cure. And so he goes to the mountains. He sees how everyone's resting in a very slow pace, of course. And then one thing leads to another, and he ends up staying there much longer than he would have ever imagined. First, it was 3 weeks, and then it was 6 weeks, and on and on. I'm not going to reveal why he ends up staying longer, but then it brings in all the cast of characters that are at this Swiss resort, I'll call it. And how over time Hans changes his view about many things, and his way of seeing the world as a young man is, I think he's an architect, engineer, is transformed by his experience. And isn't that a wonderful thing? Has that ever happened to you in a big way or a small way? I know it's happened to me, whether it's circumstance, whether it's the people that whose company I'm in. It's really a magical thing. And I think for Hans, it was both. It just warms my heart to think about this book. It the characters that Thomas Mann has drawn up in this book, and the way that over time you get to, at least I did, you get to like feel differently about, for instance, Settembrini, the character in the book, who can be rather verbose. He likes to hear himself talk. But then at the end of things, you're kind of like, I don't want to leave this place. I don't want to leave any of them. And yeah, it was such an experience for me. I just couldn't recommend it more. But like with any long book, I read it over a long period of time, and I really enjoyed that because then I was in the company of the book a long time. The third of the favorites of the books I've read so far is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This is a book that was first published in French. She's a Belgian author. It was published in 1995. And I'm gonna call it a sci-fi. I think that's what people call it. It's dystopian, and you are the brilliance to me of the reading experience of this book in the way that the author chooses to drop you right in to the dystopian world. No context, you're just dropped in. And it's purely through the writing that you or the writing of the first person narrative that you start to fill in, or you guess what the heck is going on. Maybe you never figure it out, but you're trying to create this world in your mind, kind of like a Mad Max world of survivors. Clearly something has happened. If something says it's a dystopian novel, I'm not drawn to it. So I really don't know why I picked this up. Maybe Anne from Anne Novella was talking about it, because she adores another type of dystopian novel called The Wall by Marion. I'll list her name below. And she might have been talking about this book. So then I was sold. I was like, yeah, if it's along the same vein, I'm in, because I really loved The Wall by Marion Haas. Yeah, I really liked how Jacqueline trusted the reader to fill in with their mind the world, and to not be too discouraged by not knowing all the facts and the background to what led to this very sparse world, and why the narrator is in a bunker with 39 other women, and why is it 40. Oh, it was really good and short. It's a very short read, so I couldn't recommend it more. The fourth on my list is James by Percival Everett. Is this a historical fiction? I'll call it that. It's a rewriting, a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, and by Mark Twain. And I haven't read Huckleberry Finn, but I read a lot about the story in preparation for reading James. So James is Jim, the slave, in Huckleberry Finn, the story. And this is a retelling from Jim's perspective. And if you imagine the story of Huckleberry Finn, and if that story had Jim's voice in it in terms of why he was where he was on the island when Huck himself ran away, and they met each other and decided to run away together, how dangerous that was for Jim, the reasons he was doing it, what he was giving up by running away, what he might never see again, which is his family, his wife and his children, and how in this particular rendering of the story, he is a full-blown 360-degree person. And just in Percival Everett's brilliance here of how he chooses to draw Jim, it was like such an opportunity for him to fully flesh out this person. And what if Jim was actually educated? And we learn the reasons how that could happen. But he has to hide that from Huck, because he has to hide it from everybody other than his own people, his own family. And how interesting and full-bodied Jim's life is in his enjoyment of things. Such an eye-opening look at this story, and it's an adventure because they're running away, and then there are characters that are brought in that they're running across, and there's different reasons why when they come upon someone, very vastly different ways that they're behaving when they come across mostly white people, and there are threats to them being separated, and you're just rooting for Jim all the way. It was just one of the most enjoyable reading experiences. I couldn't recommend it more. I keep thinking about it, when anyone brings it up, when I hear someone, if I'm watching a video and they've just read James, I can't wait to hear about their reading experience, because then I can live through it all again. Number five, Parade by Rachel Cusk. I talked about this a few videos ago. I did a buddy read with Nathan from Nathan's Nook. That was a very enhanced version of reading this book. I really liked having somebody to chat with and audio message back and forth with, because this is Cusk at her very Cuskiest. It is it's a way to step into a Cusk book that's doing that thing that I love about Cusk, that feels like nonfiction, that feels sometimes like autobiography or biography or memoir, where you just are dropped into scenes of artists' lives. All of them happen to have the same name, which is an interesting choice, and you're dropped into scenes, whether it's talking about the artist himself with his wife and some weird things that are going on there with how he creates art, or maybe in the next essay chapter is a standalone scene where people that have to do with a museum and an exhibit that's gone on there are talking about what happened at the exhibit. Something very extreme and unexpected happened, and they're talking about the artist that was displaying art, and did the very extreme thing happen to do with the art and all of that stuff. I really enjoyed it. It was so Cusky for me. It really filled that itch that I have for now being done with the outline trilogy, which is a completely different kind of book. But for me to read a story that's just a regular told written fiction story by Rachel Cusk, like The Second Place or something like that, I think would be hard, because I like much better the strange things that she does, like in the outline trilogy. And so this really scratched that itch for me. I would recommend it sparingly to people that, if this sounds interesting to you, like it's going to be right up your alley. Someone at a Distance, my first Dorothy Whipple. This was written in 1953. A French au pair ruthlessly sets out to seduce the husband of her employer and steal him away from her. It was the final novel of Whipple. Oh, I didn't know that. Who had been a popular writer in the 30s and 40s. It was republished in 1999 by Persephone. I'll put a photo of the cover of the book that I read, and it's beautiful. It is a Persephone book, and it was just gorgeous to hold in my hand. If I ever see this book out in the wild used, I will certainly pick it up. I had it out from this book, which I deemed a light read, took me by surprise. The relationship that forms between Louise, the au pair, and Ellen, the wife, is masterly written, is a masterpiece. So nuanced. I will link the video below where I actually talk about this book after I have freshly come from reading it. It's much more nuanced, and therefore why it's one of my favorites. I have also meant to pick up another Whipple, but I haven't yet. If you have a recommendation of another Whipple after knowing that I've read Someone at a Distance, which is superb, and I'm not doing it justice here, let me know. One of those books that you think, oh, okay, wonder what happens. Wonder if the au pair is going to have an affair with that, whatever. But what it really turns into is just a very nuanced character study of the au pair and the wife. Just so well done. Okay, so that's 6. I have some honorable mentions. I couldn't help myself. More written by Salman Rushdie that was just released this year, called Knife. Not only is Salman Rushdie just a beautiful writer, but the way that he chose to capture in the moment what he was going through, as soon as he could write about it, his wife helped him put down the details of what had happened in the knife attack that happened to him at Chautauqua. The way that he includes a conversation that he would have wanted to have with his attacker was just so beautifully done and heart rendering, because it's not the kind of chapter you would expect to read, and it's such an important part of the story and of his recovery. I just can't recommend this memoir enough. So that's one honorable mention. And I can't not mention that I read another Tolstoy at the beginning of this year, since I read War and Peace starting January 1st of 2023 and read it for an entire year, a chapter a day. I read Anna Karenina in January of 2024, and I read a chapter a day, sometimes a few chapters a day, because I was so captivated and I wasn't trying to read it over a long period of time. I went into it thinking, this isn't War and Peace. I want it to be War and Peace. And I didn't like Anna Karenina, and that was part of the issue. But there are so many wonderful characters in this story. And I think part of it is being frustrated with Anna. Tolstoy just doing his thing. I was so happy about that book. And then on another, my last honorable mention is Gertrude by Herman Hesse. I don't know if I'm saying that last name right, but I'll also link the video below where I talk about this book because it is also a psychological tale involving, if I'm remembering correctly, two men and a woman, and the woman is Gertrude. And it's the one of the men in the story is an artist, and he's somewhat having a loosely formed relationship with Gertrude, but he's going through an existential crisis, and it is much more than you would think going into this book. It was just my first taste of Herman Hesse, and I know I'll read more. All right. So what am I looking forward to now that we're in July? I am certainly going to try very soon this summer, in fact, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And I want to also try The Picnic at Hanging Rock. I'm forgetting who wrote that book, but I'll put that here after hearing about it from Catherine, the constant reader. It's a book that I've certainly heard about from the Backlisted podcast, and I know it's a movie, and I never got to it. And then I heard her talking about it recently, and it reinvigorated my interest. And I also heard her talking about Giovanni's Room, which reminded me, yes, I want to read that book. So both books are coming to me from the library. They weren't in, and so they are coming from other branches. I'll have them soon. I can try those out. And as far as newly published books that are on the horizon, I have my eye on a couple. And as a matter of fact, one of them, I have my iPad here. One of them is, it's going to be published July 23rd, and it's on order at my library, so I've put a hold on it already. It's Cesar Ira, who I have not read before, but I've certainly heard a lot about from the Mooks and the Gripes podcast with Trevor and Paul. And in a recent episode, one of them, Trevor or Paul, might have been Trevor, read from this book. He must have had an advance copy. It's two novellas in one put together. One is called Festival, which is the one he read from, and Game of the World. And I know Cesar Ira's work just from those guys talking about it. And this was the first one that really caught me. And I thought, like, I've loved everything they've talked about, but this one in particular has some humor in it and some like dark humor. And it says here that in Festival, the genius postmodern sci-fi filmmaker Alex Stierix is the star guest of a film festival in an unnamed country. He's asked to bring, if he could bring a guest, and he ends up bringing his mother. And that opening scene, when Paul or Trevor read it, it just got. This is out by New Direct. Oh, by the way, Cesar Ira is an Argentinian author, and the translator is Catherine Silva. And then from McNally Editions, there's a book that is coming up. It's called The Mystery Guest by Gregoire Boulier, translated from the French by Ben Truman, a frank and wry, mad and graceful true story about getting dumped and getting over it. When the phone rang on a cold November afternoon in 1990, Gregoire Boulier had no way of knowing that the caller was the woman who had left him without warning 5 years before, and he couldn't have guessed why she was calling, not to say she was sorry, not to explain why she vanished, but to invite him to a party, a birthday party, for a woman he'd never met. That sounds interesting. My library does not have this yet, but it did have this one, which I'm also looking forward to, called Free Love: The Story of a Great American Scandal, written by Robert Chaplin. A wry, instructive, and hugely entertaining account of one of the most sensational trials in American history. So, this was a piece of writing by Robert Chaplin that appeared in The New Yorker, which is one of the most beloved magazines that I've been reading since the 1990s. On the night of July 3rd, 1870, Elizabeth Tilton confessed to her husband that she'd had an affair with their pastor, Henry Ward Beecher. This secret would soon transfix America, for Beecher was the most famous preacher of the day, founder of the most fashionable church in Brooklyn Heights, an influential supporter of abolition, and a supporter of the campaign for women's suffrage. So thankfully, my library has it, or has it on order, and I'm on that list. Please let me know your thoughts about the books that I have talked about here. What are some of your favorites so far this year? Are any of them surprises? I don't think any of these are surprises to me, except for maybe the Dorothy Whipple. Isn't it wonderful to discover a new author that is a backlisted author? I hope you're enjoying summer. Please let us continue the conversation in the comments. And as always, thank you for joining. I appreciate it. Bye.